when it comes to the broader demonstrations we've seen in Ottawa, in Quebec City, and all across the country, I will abstain from the kind of generalizations that we've heard these last few days. I've seen on Radio-Canada an interview with what seemed to be a very kind grandmother who demonstrated for her grandkids. She looked and sounded nothing like a white supremacist, nor did the Black, Sikh, and Indigenous Canadians I saw demonstrating on my way to Parliament these last 2 weeks, or in Quebec City this last Saturday. I have enough respect for my fellow Canadians not to engage in these easy and absurd labels. Now, looking beyond the demonstrations, I've heard from hundreds of constituents and citizens who took the time to reach out to me these past weeks. Folks who have nothing to do with these demonstrations, who are for the most part vaccinated, who have done everything as they should these last 2 years. People who have shared with me legitimate concerns about where we are heading collectively. I think we must hear these concerns, and I think we must respond to them. I've heard from parents worried to see their kids sink into depression and slowly lose their joy of living. I've heard from pediatricians in tears telling me about their young patients' despair, anxiety, isolation, as well as the stunning increase in school dropouts they are observing. I've heard from artists who are on the brink of mental and financial collapse after 2 years with barely enough work to get by. I've heard from social workers answering suicide hotlines who are overwhelmed by the number of calls they're receiving. I've heard from entrepreneurs and restaurant owners who are contemplating losing what they've spent their whole lives building, and that's when it hasn't happened already. I've heard from fellow Quebecers who are rightfully appalled that in our province, in 2022, we're locking up triple-vaxxed seniors for days on end. I've heard from fellow Quebecers appalled that in Quebec, in January 2022, we have locked up kids aged 6 to 10 years old for up to 10 days in windowless rooms. Kids who tested negative, who had no symptoms, who had been in contact with someone, though, who had the virus. So let me repeat. In Quebec, in 2022, we locked up kids aged 6 to 10 for up to 10 days in windowless rooms. Let that sink in. This was a public health measure that had been drafted, approved, and applied. I've heard from people worried that we seem collectively to have forgotten that a population's health is kind of like a pie, and Omicron is but a slice of that pie. Economic health, social health, and mental health must be accounted for. I've heard from people worried that those making the decisions seem at times to have been blind to the fact that we're not all equal before lockdowns, that not everyone can earn a living on a MacBook at the cottage. I've heard people worried that a few might have lost sight of the quiet and discreet suffering of the many. I've heard people in great pain to see some of their friends whom they love and respect, but who've decided, for whatever reason we might very well disagree with, who've decided not to get vaccinated, and as a consequence, are jobless, selling what they have and moving to the United States, away from their communities, away from their friends and from their families. I've heard from teachers worried to see kids reenacting in the schoolyard the kind of discrimination and segregation we see in our society between vaccinated and unvaccinated. I've heard from people worried to see those they care about fighting each other on this issue, tearing some families and some friends apart. I've heard from a lot of people wondering why just a year ago we were all united, all in this together. And now that we have one of the most vaccinated population in the world, we've never been so divided. Now, these people are increasingly confused when, on the other hand, they hear experts like Dr. Carl Weiss, a renowned Quebec epidemiologist, state last week, and I quote, that COVID-19 is here to stay, that those at risk will have to be monitored closely when symptoms appear, that we will have to protect our healthcare systems, but that we will also have to live with the virus like we do with influenza, that we can't go back to lockdowns and restrictions not supported by science. They're confused when they hear Dr. Tam state last week that all existing public health policies, including vaccine passports, need to be re-examined, and that we need to have longer-term, sustained approaches and capacity building so we're not in crisis mode all the time as we fight this virus. They're confused when they see the undeniable trend around the world whereby, for instance, the World Health Organization recently recommended dropping or alleviating many border measures, including vaccine requirements, as they've proven to be ineffective in fighting the propagation of the Omicron variant. That's the World Health Organization. They're confused when they see countries around the world like Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, the Czech Republic, Israel, Denmark, Spain, and the UK, who have either dropped almost all restrictions or are fast moving in that direction. All countries, I note, with lower vaccination rates than us. Now, while folks are hearing and seeing all of this, they're left rightfully wondering, where the hell are we heading here in Canada? I think there lies the frustration. They feel there is no appetite from our government to adapt so as to reflect the changing data and the changing reality of the pandemic and of the world. They're worried that measures which ought to be exceptional and limited in time are being normalized with no end in sight, like vaccine passports, mandates, and requirements for travelers. They're worried because they feel it is becoming harder and harder to know where public health stops and where politics begins.